So just like you can mess around with the price, it's also possible to mess around with the quantity that a market supplies. And just like in a perfect competition model, messing with the price only makes things worse. In a perfect competition model, messing with the quantity only makes things worse. Just like in a alternative model where the price is not right, messing with the price can fix things. In models where the market does not arrive at the right quantity, quantity controls can also fix things. Okay, so let's briefly go through this. Suppose we've got, let's not use red. Suppose we've got a perfect competition model like so. We've already covered in a previous previous unit, that perfect competition model, the quantity that it arrives at is the welfare maximizing quantity. And that naturally means that you can't improve on it by using a quantity control. Okay? So let's suppose we can introduce two kinds of quantity controls. I'll call them a quota, which implies that Q has to be greater than the quota, and a cap, which says Q has to be less than the cap. Okay? Let's do the quota first because I wrote it first. Suppose we put a quota down here. Well, as with the price floors and price ceilings, this is a non-binding quota. It says that you have to at least produce this much, but the market on its own is going to produce that, and so it has no effect on the market. Okay? Just like with prices, though, you can also have a binding quota. So if we had instead put the quota over here, well, now we're saying the firms, look, you have to produce a minimum amount here. Okay? And they could assign to each firm like its share that it has to do. Okay, so an example that's in the real world is like in the US, the biofuel mandate requires that the national economy use a certain quota of ethanol in its fleet of vehicles. And there are ways to sort of divide up the obligation to supply ethanol among all the different blenders and refiners in the country. Okay, so what happens if you have this kind of quota? Well, in that case, consumers are only willing to pay this amount here. Okay? That's if you want to sell all the stuff, this is the price you sell it at. And unfortunately, firms have a marginal cost that exceeds that for much of the, for everything above this level here. And so what do firms do? Well, they basically have to eat it. Okay, if they're really forced to produce this level and sell it at a level that clears the market, this is the best they can do. Okay, in that case, what happens to consumer surplus and so on? Well, these guys are able to, if the market sells it at this place, consumer surplus is this nice big level here. Producer surplus, for the first couple units we sell, they're making money. But then to clear the market, they're not really going to be, they're going to have to sell at a loss. Okay. Depending on where you put the quota, they could still be in the black overall. It might be that the red is less than the green. And just like when we did the last unit, we're going to have these two regions cancel out. So the positive value the consumers get is offset by the negative value of the firms, but we still end up with this sort of red area here of deadweight loss. Okay, so the quota, if it's binding, also lowers welfare. And we can do the same thing with a cap. Okay, so let's erase this stuff. And diagram a cap instead. Okay, so in that case, you are restricted from producing as much as you might want. I'm not trying to click on that, I swear. All right. Get this out of here too. All right. Can I do it? Nope. Don't try. Got greedy. All right. So if we have a cap, again, if the cap is up here, you're not allowed to produce more than this amount. That's non-binding. But that's not the interesting case. Okay. The interesting case is when the cap is binding. In that case, we end up with something pretty similar to what we've diagrammed in the last lecture too. Okay. All right. If these guys, if this is the supply that's out there, that's all there is, and consumers fight over it and bid up the prices, then the price can rise up to here. And the consumer surplus is pretty little. It's just this here. The producer surplus is very good for the firms that are able to sell, and we have some deadweight loss here. So we can actually see that in this case, again, the cap lowers total welfare, but it may raise firm welfare. And the idea here is that, firms, if they were to be like a monopolist and make as much money as possible, they would reduce the quantity, and a cap does that for them. Okay, so they raise prices and they can do better. It hurts consumers, and overall, the losses exceed the gains. Okay, all right. Now, as in the last unit, I sort of said that you could make things, this argument wouldn't necessarily hold if you're not in a perfect competition model. We can say the same thing here. Okay, so suppose I'm in a monopoly model here. There's marginal revenue equal to marginal cost, and the quantity is this monopoly quantity, and the price is this monopoly price, and we have that deadweight loss. If instead I create a quota that you've got to at least supply this much, well, I can pull the market into the perfect competition outcome. All right. Another case, if there are externalities, for example, this is the private cost, the private marginal cost, here's demand, but we've got some kind of social cost, then that would mean that the market on its own would arrive at too much supply, and we would want to reduce that, possibly with a cap. All right, so sometimes you hear people argue for emission caps, for example, for like carbon emissions and things like that. And that can raise welfare. Okay, so we'll just quickly make a note. Oops. So if Q is not, if sort of the market is not optimal, like if there's no intervention, so for example, as we've said here, in the presence of a monopoly or any other market power externalities, then these interventions can raise welfare. Quantity restrictions can raise welfare. And just like with the price ceiling and the price floor, implementing those optimally requires a lot of information. Same thing with these quotas. You have to know what the right level to hit is for you to do it well, okay? Otherwise, there's no net benefit, okay? And that could be challenging to do, but in principle, intervening in the market with a restriction like this can raise welfare.